I have been not getting back to you all via video, despite the fact that you've given me great feedback that this is really effective for you, a really effective way to interact. I feel like I've had this new understanding of what it is that you are facing as students in this class, because I am having a hard time synthesizing some of my thoughts. That's why I'm hesitating in speaking to you about it, because I want to do something synthetic and not just sort of a bullet point, addressing of the issues you raise in your discussion. What I do is talk very briefly about Bolte Taylor and a few of the issues that came up for me while I was reading your responses and your discussions on Taylor. Really compelled by Juan's question about why we avoid emotions. And I would simply say, I would rephrase that question. We don't avoid emotions. Emotions are inevitable, as in Bolte Taylor's 90-second rule and other training mechanisms where people learn to work with their emotions. All the research points to the fact that we're gonna have the emotions. The question is what we do with them. But I think what Juan was getting at is this other tendency to avoid them in terms of either talking about them or admitting to them, or really working with them rather than suppressing them, right? So for example, simply put, old school, boys taught not to cry, for example, and in certain cultures, it's taught boys don't cry. Or, boys don't show physical affection in some cultures, whereas in others they do. So that's what I'm getting. What I'm getting from Juan's question is really that it's about more the display of emotions. And the things to consider for me that's really been helpful for me is something I learned before the Bolte Taylor 90-second rule, but just the idea that we do have we don't have control over our emotions per se. They're going to happen. We do have control over how we react to them. First of all. Second of all, in many environments, we are taught in our culture that emotions are not appropriate. So professional environments, or even academic environments, emotions are not appropriate. We're supposed to be professionals. We're supposed to leave the emotions at the door. I think that can really happen. I think the emotions are with us. I think we bring them in the door. We bring them into the boardroom, the war room, the strategy room, the classroom. We bring them with us. The question for me is how we work with them. And I think there's a lot of valuable training out there about how people work with emotions in professional settings, and I could share some of that information. I think this ties into a point that I believe Sean raised repeatedly in several different contexts about control. And I think one of the things that we are often encouraged to do is to control these emotions, or control them. And I find that to be a pretty repressive way of thinking about our emotions. So this idea of control, we've talked about this in other contexts. We control things to a certain extent with language, by naming them, right? This way we have a framework, we have a method of understanding. They can then get processed by the left side of our brain. So language is a form of control of ourselves. It's a self-policing, and I think that's another point that Bolte Taylor gets to. That one side of the brain is organizing information that's really good, but it is also controlling certain things in a way that may not be the most beneficial to us. And so I think, one of the things she prompts for me is this sort of understanding of that relationship between what the left brain is doing in a positive sense, but also in a potentially repressive sense to our right brain. And we didn't study psychoanalysis in 618, but that discourse, if you wanted to if you wanted to really explore the idea of language and how it works in a psychoanalytic sense, I would point you to the work of Jacques Lacan. Following Freud, Jacques Lacan and the folks who responded to Jacques Lacan and disagreed with him, his followers, as well as his detractors. So how language functions as a control mechanism, not just in culture, but within our own experience. How to organize it in a particular way. And I think it's really interesting to consider the ways in which our own personal organizing structures are, how they relate to societal organizing structures. So how are we taught how to control those thoughts or emotions? Another piece about emotion is that I think it's tied to, and this is one of the hardest parts for me to articulate, it's tied to an enormous question about the value of experience. And there's a great deal of literature on the value of experience. Judith Butler talks somewhat about it. I'm trying to remember where offhand. But the idea is that the scientific revolution, broadly stated, enabled a way of looking at the world in which we observed the behaviors of things. And I think we talked about this maybe on the first day of 618. And that has had such prominence in Western culture and society as the way we learn things, as we study the objects. And what has been given short shrift is the value of experience, and that includes the emotional experience. And I think that's been profoundly detrimental for a lot of different reasons. And one of the reasons is that it creates huge areas for miscommunication. So for example, in language, there are gaps in meaning. And we could say one thing. For example, the word bitch really sets me off. And I have a whole set of emotions and a whole set of reasons for that. And for a lot of other people, women, men, it does not set them off. I can't enter into a discourse where that word is used without having those emotions have some effect on how I interact in that discourse. Okay, so that's a very kind of practical example. And Western thought, the way Western thought has been discussed in terms of observational science, is that my emotions, or anyone's emotions, are considered less valid, broadly stated, than scientific and experiential, scientific and sort of this objective observation. There's a few things to say about that, more than a few things to say about that. One is that, first of all, as I think, again, to go back to Bolte Taylor, the science of emotion and the experience of emotion are starting to, the gap between those things is starting to close. And we're starting to learn more about emotion, and we're starting to learn more about everything that happens in the right side of the brain, all those perceptions. And as we learn more about that scientifically, it becomes more credible and valid. So in general, I think that's kind of a good thing. I think it's unfortunate that our right brain experiences have been denied credibility for centuries. So when somebody commented, and I can't remember who it was, about Bolte Taylor sort of reducing everything to science, I had a reaction to that as well, because I think, first of all, maybe whoever it was didn't put it that way, but this idea that she finds a scientific explanation for everything. And I said to, I believe it was maybe Father Tom, I could be wrong, in one of my responses to a response paper, that as far as I'm concerned, science can explain everything. And to me, it doesn't matter if science ends up explaining everything. And here's why.